They mistake my 10 years of silence for submission and my battered sedan for failure. My parents and their golden child have no clue that the quiet figure enduring their insults at the end of the table turned down a $50 million merger this morning. Tonight, as they toast a house built on debt, I will show them the true definition of settling down. When I leave, their pride will not be the only thing that collapses. My name is Hannah Crestwood, and as I turned the ignition off, the engine of my 10-year-old Honda Civic sputtered and died with a sound that resembled a dying smoker coughing up their last lung. I sat there for a moment in the silence of the cabin, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. It was Christmas Eve in Boston. The temperature outside had dropped to 12 degrees, but the heater in my car had given up the ghost somewhere around the Newton exit on the turnpike. I could see my breath fogging up the windshield, a ghostly reminder that I was still alive, even if I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I stared out the window at the house in front of me. It was a sprawling colonial revival. Rented, of course, though my parents liked to pretend they owned the deed to the soil itself. It was illuminated like a landing strip for Santa's sleigh. Every bush and tree strangled by strings of aggressive white lights. Inside, I knew. There was a roaring fire, expensive wine, and the kind of performative laughter that looked great on Instagram but felt hollow to the touch. Outside, where I sat, there was just the biting wind and the reality of who I was to them. I was the spectator, the outsider, the failure. I grabbed my bag, a worn leather tote that looked like it had survived a war, and stepped out into the snow. The wind immediately slapped my face, stinging my cheeks, but I welcomed the pain. It sharpened my focus. I walked up the driveway, passing my father's leased Mercedes and my sister's brand-new convertible, which sat there gleaming under the streetlights like a trophy, my Honda, parked crookedly at the curb with its rusted wheel well facing the house, looked like a blemish on a perfect complexion. When I pushed open the heavy front door, the heat hit me like a physical wall, thick with the scent of cinnamon, pine, and expensive perfume. My mother, Martha, was the first to see me. She was standing in the foyer, holding a crystal flute of champagne, wearing a velvet dress that hugged a figure she maintained through starvation and surgery. She did not smile. She did not open her arms. Instead, her eyes darted immediately to my shoes sensible, scuffed winter boots, and then traveled up to my charcoal gray pantsuit. "Hannah," she said, her voice flat. It wasn't a greeting. It was an accusation. "You are late." "Traffic was bad coming out of the city," I said, my voice steady. Martha took a sip of her champagne, her eyes narrowing as she assessed my outfit again. "It is Christmas Eve. Hannah, everyone else is dressed for a celebration. You look like you are going to an audit at the IRS. Could you not have found something brighter, something that does not scream depression?" Before I could answer, a squeal erupted from the living room. Tiffany appeared, spinning around so her dress caught the light of the chandelier. She was wearing a gold sequined gown that dipped low in the back, a garment that probably cost $3,000. She looked like a human Oscar statue. "Oh my God, Hannah!" Tiffany cried out, rushing over but stopping a foot short of actually hugging me, likely to avoid wrinkling her silk or touching my wool coat. "You made it? I was just telling Daddy about my new vision board for the upcoming year. You look tired. Are you still working that desk job?" "It pays the bills," I said simply, hanging my coat on the rack. "Well, you need to learn to manifest abundance," Tiffany said, touching her hair. "I just launched my new consultation package on social media called Awaken Your Inner Goddess. I charge $500 for a 45-minute Zoom call. It is all about mindset." My father, Arthur, walked in from the living room, his face flushed with the rosy glow of good scotch. He wrapped an arm around Tiffany's shoulders, beaming at her as if she had just discovered the cure for polio. "The girl is a genius," Arthur declared, pointing his glass at me. "She understands the modern economy. Hannah, it is all about the personal brand. Tiffany is the pride of the Crestwood line. She knows how to live. I forced a smile, the muscles in my face protesting the effort. It sounds very impressive, I lied. We moved to the dining room for dinner. The table was a masterpiece of holiday decor, laden with silver candlesticks and holly, but the seating arrangement told the real story. Dad sat at the head, Mom at the foot, and Tiffany was seated to Dad's right, near the warmth of the fireplace. I was placed at the corner of the table near the kitchen swing door, a spot where the draft from the pantry hit the back of my neck every 30 seconds. I looked down at my place setting. While the others had the heavy, ornate family silver, my fork and knife were lighter. Mismatched stainless steel pieces, clearly pulled from the overflow drawer. It was a petty detail, the kind only Martha would orchestrate. It was a silent message: you do not fit the set. Throughout the first course, a lobster bisque that was slightly too salty. The conversation was a monologue about Tiffany's internet fame. She talked about her engagement rates, her followers, and the filtered photos of her avocado toast that had gone viral. I actually had a pretty big week at work, I ventured during a lull, cutting a piece of bread. We closed a deal this morning that I have been working on for 6 months. It involved a merger of 2 majors. Hannah, please, Martha interrupted, not even looking up from her soup. We are trying to have a nice family dinner. Nobody understands the technical jargon you speak. Do not bore us. Tiffany, tell us about that influencer trip to Tulum you are planning. I shut my mouth. The bread turned to ash in my throat. I looked at my father, hoping for a flicker of interest, but he was busy refilling Tiffany's wine glass, hanging on her every word about beach clubs and sunset yoga sessions. The main course came and went, and I ate in silence. The invisible daughter in the corner, I watched them, analyzing them like data points. I saw the way my father's hand shook slightly when he poured the wine, stress, likely financial. I saw the way my mother kept glancing at Tiffany with a desperate, hungry look, living vicariously through her golden child. They were drowning, and they were clinging to Tiffany as if she were a life raft, unaware that she was actually an anchor made of fool's gold. Finally, as dessert was being served, Martha stood up. She picked up her spoon and tapped it against her glass. Clink, clink, clink. The sound was sharp and piercing. "Attention, everyone," Martha said, her voice trembling with theatrical emotion. She placed a hand on Tiffany's shoulder. "I have saved the best news for last. This has been a hard year for many, but not for the Crestwoods. Our Tiffany has officially done it." Arthur clapped his hands together. "Tell them, Martha." "Tiffany," Martha announced, her eyes gleaming, "has just closed on a townhouse, a beautiful 4-story home in the historic district. She is a homeowner at 26. The room erupted in applause from my father. Tiffany did a little mock bow, looking bashful. "Well, the market was just calling to me," she giggled. And I needed a space that reflected my vibration. I sat perfectly still. I knew the housing market in that district, I knew the interest rates, and I knew for a fact that Tiffany did not have the credit score to buy a used bicycle, let alone a luxury townhouse. Then, Martha turned to me. The warmth vanished from her face, replaced by a cold, pitying sneer. The room went quiet. "Your sister has bought a house, Hannah," Martha said, her voice dripping with condescension. "She is building a life. She is successful. And then, there is you." She gestured vaguely at my side of the table, at my mismatched silverware and my plain clothes. "Look at you, Hannah," she continued, her voice rising, "driving that piece of junk car, living in who knows what kind of apartment, working a job that goes nowhere. When are you going to learn from your sister? When will you finally settle down and stop making your father and me worry so much about your future?" The question hung in the air like toxic smoke. "When will you settle down?" I looked at Tiffany, who was smirking behind her wine glass. I looked at Arthur, who was nodding in agreement with his wife. And finally, I looked at Martha, the woman who had birthed me but never actually saw me. They wanted shame. They wanted me to look down at my plate and apologize for my existence. They wanted the satisfaction of my defeat to sweeten their dessert. Instead, I felt a muscle in my jaw relax. A strange, cold sensation washed over me, calming my heart rate. I thought about the phone call I had taken at 6 in the morning. I thought about the $50 million in liquid assets I had moved into a holding company just before lunch. I thought about the deed to the Ravenwood estate sitting in my safe deposit box, a property worth 10 times the townhouse Tiffany had just been scammed into buying. I picked up my cheap stainless steel spoon. I looked Martha dead in the eye, and then, slowly, deliberately, I let the corner of my lip curl upward. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of a predator watching prey walk into a trap. The play begins. I thought, that smirk on my face did not appear out of thin air. It was a shield I had spent nearly 3 decades forging, layer by painful layer, in the fires of a childhood defined by benign neglect. As I looked at my mother across the holiday table, the ghost of the little girl I used to whisper in my ear, she reminded me that this dynamic, the shining star and the silent shadow, was not a new development. It was the foundational architecture of the Crestwood family. Growing up, the roles were assigned to us before we even knew how to speak. I was the sensible one, the quiet one, the one who did not need to be worried about. Tiffany was the vibrant one, the loud one, the one who demanded the oxygen in every room she entered. My parents mistook my silence for lack of need, and Tiffany's noise for vitality. I was a piece of furniture, reliable and sturdy. Tiffany was the art on the walls, meant to be admired and protected at all costs. I remember being 12 years old and falling in love with the piano. I had spent months staying late at the school music room, teaching myself to read sheet music, my fingers aching to touch the keys. I finally gathered the courage to ask Arthur and Martha for lessons. I had a brochure for a local teacher who charged $20 an hour. I presented it to them at dinner, my heart pounding against my ribs. Arthur had sighed, putting down his fork. He looked at me with that weary expression he reserved for bills and taxes. He told me that money was tight that quarter. He explained that the economy was rough and that extracurriculars were a luxury we simply could not afford. I nodded, swallowing my disappointment, forcing myself to be the understanding daughter they expected me to be. I told myself it was selfish to ask. Exactly 7 days later, a delivery truck backed into our driveway. 2 men unloaded a massive, professional-grade karaoke system with flashing disco lights and 2 wireless microphones. It cost $600. I knew the price because the receipt was left on the kitchen counter. When I asked about it, Martha waved her hand dismissively. She said Tiffany had shown a spark of interest in singing after watching a talent show on television, and it was their duty as parents to nurture her potential. That night, while I tried to do my math homework, the house shook with Tiffany's off-key screeching of pop songs. My parents sat on the couch, clapping and cheering for her, their faces glowing with pride. My desire to learn a discipline was an expense. Tiffany's desire to make noise was an investment. That was the pattern. But the moment that truly severed the emotional tether between us happened 6 years later. On the day of my high school graduation, I was the valedictorian of my class. I had the highest grade point average in the history of the school. I had written a speech about resilience and the future. A speech I had practiced in front of the bathroom mirror until I had every inflection memorized. I had given my parents the date and time 3 months in advance. I had reminded them every week. On the morning of the ceremony, chaos erupted in the kitchen. Tiffany, who was a sophomore with failing grades, had spotted an open casting call for a teen modeling agency in the city. It was a long shot, the kind of cattle call where thousands of girls line up for 3 seconds of attention. But Tiffany wanted to go. She was crying about how this was her big break, how she could feel it in her bones. I stood in the living room in my cap and gown, waiting. Martha rushed past me, grabbing her purse. She told me to take the bus to the stadium. She said they had to drive Tiffany to the casting because she was too nervous to go alone. She promised they would try to make it back in time for my speech. They did not make it back. I stood on the podium in front of 2,000 people. I looked out into the sea of faces, searching for the 2 people who were supposed to be there. I saw the empty seats in the reserved section for families of honor students. They were gaping holes in the crowd, black voids that seemed to swallow my voice. I delivered my speech to strangers. I accepted my diploma with a smile that did not reach my eyes. When I checked my phone afterward, there was a single text from Arthur. It said the casting ran late, and Tiffany was devastated because they told her she was 2 inches too short. He said they were taking her out for ice cream to cheer her up and that they would see me at home. That night, there was no celebration dinner for the valedictorian. There was a comfort session for the failed model. When I tried to show them my diploma, Martha told me to put it away. She whispered that I shouldn't gloat about my success while my sister was feeling so fragile. "You are the older sister, Hannah," she had said, a phrase that had become a shackle around my ankles. "You are strong. You can handle things on your own. Tiffany needs us more. You have to yield to her. It is your job to protect her feelings." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They twisted my independence into a character flaw. In their eyes, my ability to take care of myself was evidence that I was cold and distant. They claimed I didn't love the family because I didn't need them. Conversely, Tiffany's constant state of crisis, her inability to function without their money and attention, was interpreted as love. Her dependence validated their existence as parents. She made them feel needed. I made them feel obsolete. I realized then that I was Plan B. I was the insurance policy they hoped they would never have to use. Tiffany was the star, the lottery ticket they were betting everything on. I was the backup generator kept in the basement. She was the chandelier in the foyer. From that day forward, I stopped sharing. When I won awards in college, I threw the certificates in the trash before I came home for the holidays. When I got promoted, I told them nothing. I learned that my achievements were not a source of pride for them. They were a source of insecurity for Tiffany, and therefore, a problem for my parents. The image that defines my youth is not a family portrait. It is a memory of a Tuesday night in winter. I was sitting at the small desk in the corner of the hallway because Tiffany had turned the shared bedroom into a dressing room for her friends. The hallway was dark to save electricity. I was doing my calculus homework by the light of a single, flickering bulb. Through the glass doors of the living room, I could see them. Arthur, Martha, and Tiffany were huddled together on the plush sofa, watching a comedy movie. The room was bathed in the warm, golden glow of the fireplace. They were laughing. I could not hear the joke, but I could see their heads thrown back, their bodies shaking with mirth. They looked like a unit, a complete circle, and I was on the other side of the glass, in the shadows, solving equations that would one day make me richer than they could comprehend. They thought I was out there in the dark because I wanted to be alone. They never understood that I was out there because they had never invited me into the light. And as I sat at that Christmas dinner table years later, watching them fawn over a house bought with debt, I realized the darkness had been a gift. It was in the dark that I learned to see things they were blind to. It was in the dark that I learned to hunt. The acceptance letter from Columbia University was heavy. It felt like a brick of gold in my hands, a tangible validation of every sleepless night and every skipped party throughout high school. I placed it on the kitchen table in front of my parents, naive enough to believe that the prestige of an Ivy League institution would finally force them to see me. Arthur picked it up, scanned the header, and then set it back down as if it were a junk mail flyer for a pizza place. He exchanged a look with Martha, a silent communication of shared burden that I knew all too well. "It is a great achievement, Hannah," Arthur said, his tone measuring the words like expensive ingredients he did not want to waste. "But we have to be realistic. The tuition is astronomical. We simply cannot liquidate the assets right now." "I have financial aid," I argued, my voice tight, "but I need help with the rest. The room, the board, the gap that the scholarship does not cover." Martha sighed, reaching out to pat my hand, her touch cold and brief. "We have to think about the family as a whole. Dear, Tiffany is at a very delicate crossroads. She is feeling lost. She needs to find her purpose. We have decided to invest in a gap year for her." The investment turned out to be a 6-month tour of Europe. While I was packing my bags to move into a dorm room the size of a prison cell, facing a tuition bill that terrified me, my parents were booking first-class tickets to Paris for Tiffany. They claimed she needed to find her artistic voice and seek inspiration. The reality of that inspiration was documented daily on social media. While I was sitting in a lecture hall, stomach growling because I was rationing a meal plan I could barely afford, Tiffany was posting photos of herself eating gelato in Rome and shopping for leather boots in Florence. The caption usually reads something profound like, "Investing in my soul" or "The world is my classroom." I did not go to parties. I did not join sororities. I did not have the quintessential college experience. I survived. I took on 3 jobs to bridge the gap my parents refused to fill. By day, I was a research assistant in the library, shelving books in silence. By evening, I tutored wealthy underclassmen in macroeconomics, and by night, from 10 in the evening until 2 in the morning, I waited tables at a 24-hour diner near campus, where the tips were measured in quarters and the customers were mostly drunk or heartbroken. My sleep schedule was a rigid, brutal calculation. I slept 4 hours a night. 4 hours. That was the maximum I could afford if I wanted to maintain my 4.0 grade point average and pay my rent. I learned to sleep in 10-minute bursts on the bus. I learned that black coffee is a meal replacement if you drink enough of it. One rainy Tuesday in November of my sophomore year, I was scrubbing a ketchup stain off a diner table. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket. It was a notification from Instagram. Tiffany had just posted a photo from a 5-star ski resort in the Swiss Alps. She was holding a glass of champagne, wrapped in a fur coat that likely cost more than my entire semester's tuition. The caption read, "Thanks, Daddy, for making my winter dreams come true. Blessed." I looked at the screen. Then I looked at the ketchup stain. In that moment, something inside me calcified. The last remnants of self-pity evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I realized that crying about fairness was a waste of calories. The world was not fair. The system was rigged. And if I wanted to win, I had to stop playing by the rules of a family that wanted me to lose. I became obsessed with money. Not the spending of it, but the mechanics of it. I switched my major to finance and strategic management. I devoured books on market theory, asset allocation, and high-frequency trading. I took the crumpled dollar bills from my tips money that smelled like grease and syrup, and I started investing. I opened a brokerage account with $500. I remember the trembling in my fingers when I bought my first fractional shares. I watched the numbers move. I learned to read the rhythm of the market, the ebb and flow of capital. I adopted a mantra that I whispered to myself whenever I felt the urge to buy a new coat or order takeout. Cash is king. While my peers were racking up credit card debt to look cool, I was living like a monk and compounding my interest. I wore the same boots for 4 years. I ate instant noodles until the sodium made my fingers swell. But by my senior year, I had a portfolio that was outperforming the market average by 12%. I had built a safety net out of nothing but grit and exhaustion. My academic performance did not go unnoticed. While most students were scrambling for internships, I was headhunted. A recruiter from Ethos Dynamics approached me after a seminar on crisis management. Ethos was not a company that advertised. They were a shadow corporation, a massive conglomerate dealing in defense technology, data intelligence, and government contracts. They did not want the loud, charismatic leaders like Tiffany. They wanted the ghosts. They wanted people like me, obsessed, disciplined, and utterly detached from emotional distractions. I graduated summa cum laude. It was the highest honor the university could bestow. The ceremony was held on a humid day in May. The stadium was packed with thousands of families holding flowers and balloons. I sat in the front row, wearing the gold cord of honor around my neck. Beside me, my seatmate was waving frantically to her parents, who were screaming her name from the bleachers. I checked my phone. There was a text message from Martha. "So proud of you." Hannah. We were all ready to leave, but Tiffany woke up with a scratchy throat and a bit of a temperature. She thinks it might be the flu. We cannot leave her alone when she is feeling so poorly. Take lots of pictures for us. Love, Mom. I stared at the screen, a scratchy throat. They missed the culmination of 4 years of blood and sweat because Tiffany had the sniffles. I looked up at the empty sky. I did not cry. I did not feel the crushing weight of disappointment I had felt at high school graduation. Instead, I felt a sudden lightness. The final tether had snapped. The last wire connecting my self-worth to their approval had been cut. A hand landed on my shoulder. I turned to see Sarah, my roommate, the only person in the world who knew how hard I worked. She was holding a single sunflower she had bought from a bodega. "I am here," Sarah said, "and you are incredible." I took the flower. "Thank you," I said. As I walked across the stage to accept my diploma, I made a vow. It was not a promise to the universe. It was a contract with myself. I would never ask Arthur and Martha for a single cent again. I would never let them know the extent of my success. I would never give them the opportunity to use me, to guilt me, or to leverage my hard work to fund Tiffany's delusions. They wanted me to be a failure. Fine. I would play the part. I would be the struggling daughter. I would be the cautionary tale. I would let them underestimate me while I built an empire in the shadows. I took the diploma, shook the dean's hand, and walked off the stage. Hannah Crestwood, the daughter they ignored, died on that stage. The woman who walked down the stairs was the future chief strategy officer of Ethos Dynamics, and she owed them absolutely nothing. The glass walls of the conference room at Ethos Dynamics were soundproof, a necessary feature when you were discussing the collapse of a national currency or the suppression of a data leak that could topple a G7 government. I sat at the head of the table, the youngest person in the room by at least 15 years, and certainly the only woman. The men around me were shouting, their ties loosened, sweat beading on their foreheads. They were panicking. A mid-sized European bank had just suffered a catastrophic breach of their private client list, and the fallout was threatening to expose 3 billionaires and a prime minister. I checked my watch. It was 2 p.m. "Gentlemen," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the chaos like a scalpel. The room fell silent instantly. "We are not here to debate the morality of the breach. We are here to contain the blast radius, isolate the server nodes in Frankfurt, reroute the traffic through our subsidiaries in Singapore, and tell the press it was a scheduled maintenance outage. If they ask questions, bury them in technical jargon until they lose interest." They nodded. They scrambled. They obeyed. This was my world. At 29 years old, I was the chief strategy officer of Ethos Dynamics. I had ascended the corporate ladder with a speed that terrified my colleagues, moving from a junior analyst to the C-suite in less than 7 years. They called me the Ice Queen behind my back. They whispered that I had ice water in my veins, that I never panicked, never raised my voice, and never let emotion cloud a judgment call. They were right, of course, but they gave credit to the wrong source. They thought I was born this way. They did not know that my composure was not a natural gift. It was a survival mechanism forged in the fires of the Crestwood household. Dealing with a screaming board of directors was nothing compared to navigating the emotional minefield of my mother's passive-aggressive silence. Negotiating with hostile corporate raiders was child's play when you had spent a lifetime negotiating for your own existence with parents who preferred your sister. My success came with a price tag, and it was a heavy one. My base salary was in the high 6 figures, but with performance bonuses and stock options, my annual take-home pay comfortably cleared 7 figures. I did not just save money, I multiplied it. I had a diverse portfolio of blind trusts, offshore holding companies, and real estate investments that I managed under a pseudonym. I owned commercial warehouses in Ohio, apartment complexes in Texas, and tech startups in Silicon Valley. But to Arthur, Martha, and Tiffany, I was Hannah, the administrative assistant. I had crafted this lie with the same meticulous detail I used to construct corporate firewalls. I told them I worked in data entry and filing for a mid-level logistics firm. I complained about my boss, a fictional tyrant named Mr. Henderson, who supposedly docked my pay if I was 5 minutes late. I wore nondescript suits from discount racks when I visited them. I kept my hair simple, my makeup minimal, and my jewelry non-existent. The deception was necessary, essential. I knew my family. I knew their relationship with money was parasitic. If they knew I had a net worth that rivaled a small island nation, the dynamic would shift instantly. I would no longer be the disappointment. I would be the bank. The guilt trips would evolve into demands. Tiffany's loans would become investments. My retirement fund would become their slush fund. My real life was a fortress of solitude and luxury. I lived in a penthouse apartment in the Seaport District, 50 floors up, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the harbor. The floors were heated marble. The kitchen was equipped with appliances worth more than my father's car. It was a sanctuary of silence, a place where I could shed the armor of the day and drink a glass of vintage Bordeaux while watching the city lights flicker below. But whenever my mother called, I let it go to voicemail. Then, I would call her back an hour later, breathless, claiming I had just stepped off the subway to my apartment. "I am just getting home to the duplex," I would lie, describing a fictitious basement apartment in a gritty suburb called Revere. My roommate, Karen, left her dishes in the sink again, and the radiator is making that clanking sound. "Oh, Hannah," Martha would sigh, her voice dripping with that familiar mix of pity and superiority. "You really should look for a better situation. Maybe if you applied yourself more at work, you could get a raise. Tiffany just stayed at the Four Seasons for a brand collaboration. She says the sheets were like sleeping on a cloud." "That sounds nice for her," I would say, staring at my own Italian linen sheets. "I have to go. Mom, I need to hand wash my work shirts so they dry by morning." The maintenance of this charade required constant vigilance. Tiffany was the primary threat. She treated me like a broken ATM that occasionally dispensed spare change. Her texts would come in at random hours, usually accompanied by a crying face emoji. "Hey sis, total emergency. My card got declined at Sephora bank error. Obviously, and I need these products for a video shoot tomorrow. Can you Venmo me $200? I will pay you back as soon as my brand check clears. XOXO. I always send the money, $200, $300, sometimes $500. To me, it was negligible. It was the cost of doing business. It was the subscription fee for my freedom. As long as I kept feeding them scraps, they would never suspect I was sitting at the banquet table. If I refused, they might dig deeper. They might come visit. They might see the cracks in the facade. So I paid. I played the part of the struggling sister who sacrificed her grocery money to help the star. The irony reached its peak just 2 weeks before Christmas. I arrived at my office at Etheris, greeted by my personal assistant, David, who handed me a double espresso in my itinerary. "You have a meeting with the Senate Oversight Committee at 10, David said, walking briskly beside me. "Then lunch with the CEO of Omnicorp, and this arrived for you." He handed me a thick yellow envelope with my name scrawled in my mother's handwriting. The return address was their rented mansion. I sat down at my mahogany desk, which cost $12,000, and opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of paper coupons cut from the Sunday newspaper. There were coupons for canned tuna, generic toilet paper, and 2-for-1 frozen dinners. Attached was a sticky note. "Hannah, I saw these and thought of you. I know things are tight. Every dollar counts, love. Mom." I picked up a coupon for 50 cents off a can of beans. I looked at the expiration date. It expired 3 months ago. I started to laugh. It was a dry, humorless sound that echoed in the vast, modern office. My mother had spent 60 cents on postage to send me garbage. She truly believed I was destitute. She believed I was scraping by, counting pennies, eating expired beans in a cold basement. "David," I called out, pressing the intercom button. "Yes, Ms. Crestwood." "Add buy a new luxury SUV to my personal to-do list for January," I said, tossing the coupon into the recycling bin. "And send a thank you card to my mother. Tell her the gift was practical." I spun my chair around to face the window. The city of Boston lay spread out before me, a grid of power and ambition. Somewhere out there, in the suburbs, My family was drowning in debt. They refused to acknowledge, pinning their hopes on a daughter who was selling smoke and mirrors on the internet. Meanwhile, the daughter they pitied was running the world. The disconnect was almost beautiful. It was a masterpiece of misunderstanding. But as I watched the snow begin to fall over the harbor, I knew the game was entering its final act. The disparity between their perception and my reality had become too vast to sustain. The bubble was going to burst, and I intended to be the one holding the needle, to understand the explosion that was about to occur at the Christmas dinner table. One has to analyze the fuse. That fuse was lit exactly 6 months ago, during the sweltering heat of July, when Tiffany's digital empire began to crumble. I did not need to guess what was happening. I had the data. At Ethos Dynamics, I have access to sophisticated consumer analytics tools, and out of morbid curiosity, I had set up a passive alert for the Tiffany Crestwood brand. The metrics were brutal. The social media algorithms had shifted, favoring authentic, raw content over the highly curated, filtered perfection Tiffany sold. Her engagement rates plummeted by 40% in a single quarter. Her sponsorship deals with a tea detox company and a fast fashion label were not renewed. But Tiffany did not scale back. She did not get a job. She did what all failing businesses with bad management do. She spent more money to maintain the illusion of growth. Her credit card utilization spiked. She was charging luxury handbags, spa days, and trips to the Hamptons to 3 different cards, all of which were near their limit. When the minimum payments became impossible to ignore, she went to the bank of mom and dad. I watched the transaction history from afar. I saw Arthur liquidate a significant portion of his 401k portfolio. He sold blue-chip stocks that he had held for 20 years, incurring a massive tax penalty, just to pay off Tiffany's American Express bill. It was financial suicide. He was burning the lumber of his own lifeboat to keep Tiffany warm. Then came the pivot. Tiffany convinced them that the reason she was failing was not her lack of talent or work ethic, but her environment. She claimed she could not be a high-end lifestyle coach while living in her old bedroom. She needed a stage. She needed a property that screamed success to attract high-net-worth followers and, more implicitly, a wealthy husband who could fund the lifestyle she felt entitled to. She found a development called the Sterling Lofts. It was a new construction project in a trendy district, promising luxury living for the urban elite. To the untrained eye, it looked like a dream. To a financial analyst like me, it was a bear trap. The developer was offering predatory financing options to move units that were overpriced by at least 30%. They offered a low introductory interest rate that would reset and triple after 24 months. It was an adjustable rate mortgage, the kind of toxic financial product that caused the housing crash 2 decades ago, repackaged with a shiny bow for desperate people like my sister. Tiffany did not qualify for the loan. Her income was non-existent, and her credit score was in the low 500s. So, Arthur and Martha stepped in. This is where the tragedy turned into a farce. My parents did not have the cash for the down payment. Their savings were already depleted from the credit card bailout. So, they made the fatal decision. They decided to leverage their own home, the house they lived in, the one place that represented their security, their retirement. Their only real asset became the collateral. They took out a home equity line of credit, stripping the equity they had spent 30 years building, and handed it over as a down payment for Tiffany's townhouse. They co-signed the mortgage, tying their financial fate inextricably to a woman who thought budget was a type of rental car. I knew all of this. I saw the credit inquiries hit the bureaus. I saw the title transfer records. I saw the exact terms of the loan document, including the fine print about the balloon payment due in 2 years. I sat in my office at Atheris, staring at the screens. I could have called them. I could have driven over and explained the math. I could have shown them that they were buying a sinking ship and chaining themselves to the hull. But I stayed silent. Why? Because I played the scenario out in my head 1,000 times, and the result was always the same. If I warned them, they would not thank me. They would accuse me of being jealous. Martha would say, "You just do not want your sister to have nice things because you are miserable," Arthur would say. "I know what I am doing, Hannah. "Do not lecture me about money." They would frame my logic as malice. So, I let them sign. I watched from the shadows as they toasted with cheap champagne, celebrating their investment. They believed the lie. They believed Tiffany would launch her new brand, marry a hedge fund manager, and pay them back within a year. They were living in a bubble of delusion, fueled by hope and arrogance. They did not realize that the market does not care about hope. The market cares about liquidity and leverage, and they were now leveraged to the hilt. It was a strange feeling, watching your family drive a car off a cliff while they argued about which radio station to play. They were laughing, planning furniture layouts, and dreaming of the future. While I was calculating the terminal velocity of their crash, they thought they were saving Tiffany. In reality, they were drowning themselves. And the cruelest irony was that they looked down on me, the only person in the bloodline who actually understood how the game was played, and the only person with the resources to save them. But they were so busy pushing me down to lift Tiffany up that they did not notice the ground beneath their own feet was crumbling. By December, the cracks were already showing. The introductory rate on the townhouse was manageable, but the HOA fees were double what was disclosed. Tiffany's relaunch had flopped, and Arthur was starting to realize that retirement was no longer an option. He would have to work until he died to service the debt. They were terrified. I could see it in the way Arthur poured his scotch. I could hear it in the desperation of Martha's voice when she bragged about the house. They needed a miracle. They needed a way out, and that was why they had invited me to Christmas dinner. They did not want my company. They wanted my signature. They thought I was a useful idiot with a clean credit history who could be manipulated into shouldering the burden they could no longer carry. I closed the file on my computer screen. The data was clear. The Crestwood family was insolvent. They just did not know it yet. But tonight, over roast beef and forced smiles, I was going to give them the audit report they never asked for. While my parents were busy signing their souls away to a predatory lender for a townhouse that smelled of fresh paint and desperation, I was finalizing a transaction that would have made their hearts stop. I was not buying a starter home. I was not looking for a stepping stone. I was acquiring a kingdom. The deal had taken 6 months to structure, not because I lacked the funds, but because I required absolute anonymity. I utilized a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, a faceless entity with a generic name that appeared on no public records linked to Hannah Crestwood. The wire transfer I authorized on a Tuesday morning was for $12,500,000. It was a single, clean payment, no mortgage, no banks, no interest rates, just a straight exchange of liquid capital for absolute sovereignty. The property was known as the Ravenwood Estate, located in the most exclusive enclave of the state, hidden deep within the Berkshire foothills. Ravenwood was not just a residence, it was a piece of history. The estate spanned 50 acres of pristine, private land. It was surrounded by a dense forest of ancient pine and oak trees that acted as a natural fortress, shielding the house from the prying eyes of the road and the world beyond. I remember the first time I drove through the iron gates after the closing. The driveway was a winding ribbon of crushed white stone, a mile long, flanked by statues that had stood there since the 1920s. As I rounded the final bend, the main house revealed itself. It was a masterpiece of Georgian architecture, built from gray limestone that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. It possessed a gravity, a weight that Tiffany's trendy, paper-thin townhouse could never hope to achieve. But while the exterior whispered of old money and tradition, the interior was a testament to the future. I had spent an additional $2 million retrofitting the estate with the kind of technology usually reserved for military installations. The security system was biometric. The climate control was predictive. Every light, every lock, and every window shade could be controlled by my voice or my phone. It was a 19th century castle with a 21st century brain. I walked through the grand foyer, my heels clicking on the black and white marble floor. The sound echoed up to the hand-painted dome ceiling 3 stories above. I walked past the ballroom, which I had converted into a private art gallery, and out onto the rear terrace. The view was mine alone. A private, spring-fed lake stretched out before me. its surface like a mirror of black glass. At the edge of the property, discreetly tucked behind a line of spruce trees, was a private helipad. I did not own a helicopter yet, but I liked knowing that if I ever wanted to leave the earth without touching a public road, I could. This was not a house designed to impress guests. It was a house designed to protect its owner, the senior real estate broker, a man named Mr. Sterling, who wore suits that cost more than my father's car, met me in the solarium to hand over the final set of physical keys. He looked around the space, clearly anticipating the social potential of such a venue. "Ms. Crestwood," he said, bowing slightly, "this estate is truly magnificent. I assume you will be hosting a housewarming gala. The acoustics in the ballroom are legendary. I can put you in touch with the best event planners in Boston. It would be the event of the season." I looked at him, and then I looked out at the silent, frozen lake. "No, Mr. Sterling," I replied, my voice calm and final. "There will be no parties. There will be no galas. I did not buy Ravenwood to entertain people I do not like. I bought it to be away from them." He looked confused. "But surely you want to show it off." "This is a sanctuary, not a circus," I said. "You may go." After he left, I walked to the north wing of the house. This was my favorite room, the library. It was a 2-story cathedral of knowledge, lined from floor to ceiling with books. A spiral staircase made of wrought iron connected the 2 levels. In the center of the room stood a massive fireplace large enough to roast a whole hog. Though I preferred the quiet crackle of birch logs, I walked over to the fireplace, above the mantel. In the spot where a previous owner might have hung a portrait of an ancestor or a famous battle scene, I had placed a single, small frame. It was a watercolor painting of a bluebird. The perspective was slightly off, and the colors were bleeding outside the lines. I painted it when I was 7 years old. I remembered running to my mother, bursting with pride, to show her my creation. Martha had looked at it, frowned, and told me it was clutter. She had thrown it into the recycling bin. I had waited until everyone was asleep that night to fish it out. I had smoothed out the wrinkles and hidden it in the bottom of my school bag. For 22 years, I had carried that crumpled piece of paper with me from apartment to apartment. Now, it hangs in the center of a $12 million estate. I had paid a professional conservator $4,000 to restore the paper and frame it in museum-quality glass. It was the most valuable thing in the house, not because of what it was worth, but because of what it represented. It was the first thing I had ever saved from them. It was the first time I had chosen my own value over their rejection. I sat down in a leather wingback chair facing the painting. I took a sip of the vintage cognac I had poured for myself. The silence in the room was heavy and rich. It was not the lonely silence of the outcast child doing homework in the hallway. It was the luxurious silence of a woman who controlled her own universe. I thought about Tiffany and her townhouse. I knew that the walls there were so thin she could hear her neighbors arguing. I knew that every piece of furniture she owned was bought on credit. I knew that her home was actually a prison cell made of debt. A stage set that could be repossessed the moment the bank realized she was a fraud. Her house was a scream for attention. My estate was a whisper of power. She wanted everyone to look at her because she was terrified that if they looked away, she would cease to exist. I wanted everyone to look away because I knew that my existence was real enough without their validation. I took another sip of cognac, the warmth spreading through my chest. The contrast was absolute. They were playing a game of checkers with plastic pieces, trying to capture each other's attention. I was playing chess on a board made of marble, and I had already cleared the table. I checked my phone. It was almost time to head to the Christmas dinner. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and prepared to leave my fortress. I would drive my rusted Honda back to their rented world of falsehoods. I would let them mock me. I would let them pity me, because I knew that when the night was over, I would return here, to Ravenwood, where the only approval I needed was the sound of my own footsteps on the stone I owned. The summons arrived exactly 7 days before Christmas. I was sitting in my corner office at Etherisk Dynamics, reviewing the acquisition strategy for a Scandinavian biometrics firm, when my personal cell phone buzzed. It was a ringtone I had assigned specifically to family, a jarring, discordant alarm that I never ignored, not out of affection, but out of necessity. It was Martha. I let it ring 3 times before answering, composing my voice into the flat, submissive register of the daughter they thought they knew. "Hello, Mom." "Hannah." Her voice cracked through the speaker, sharp and brittle. There was no greeting, no inquiry about my health. "We expect you for dinner on Christmas Eve, 6 o'clock sharp, and do not wear that awful gray sweater you wore last year. Tiffany is having professional photos taken for her socials." "I am not sure if I can get the time off," I lied, leaning back in my leather executive chair. "My boss, Mr. Henderson, is really piling on the paperwork." "Make time," Martha snapped. Then, her voice shifted. It dropped an octave, becoming saccharine and wheedling, a tone she usually reserved for asking Arthur for money. "Look, Hannah, we want the whole family together. It is important. Tiffany has accomplished so much. We want you to be part of her joy. Besides, there is something we need to discuss with you, something that could really help you feel more involved." I ended the call with a non-committal promise to try, but my mind was already dissecting the conversation like a forensic pathologist examining a corpse. Something that could help you feel more involved. That was the tell. I knew exactly what they wanted. I had been monitoring their credit inquiries. 3 days ago, Tiffany had applied for a $50,000 personal loan to furnish her new townhouse with imported Italian leather and marble. The application had been rejected within 30 seconds. Her debt-to-income ratio was catastrophic. Arthur and Martha had tried to co-sign, but their credit was now shot, dragged down by the maxed-out home equity line they had taken for the down payment. They were desperate. They had the house, the shell of the dream, but they could not afford to put anything inside it. A lifestyle influencer could not broadcast from an empty room. They needed a fresh host to parasitize. They needed me, in their minds. Hannah the secretary was poor, yes, but she was also boring. She paid her rent on time. She had no student loans because she worked through college. She had no car payments because she drove a wreck. To them, I was a pristine vessel of creditworthiness. They did not want my money. They thought I did not have any. They wanted my name. They wanted me to co-sign a loan so they could ruin my credit score to buy Tiffany a sofa she could not afford. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. "David, come in here, please." My assistant appeared a moment later, tablet in hand. "Yes, Ms. Crestwood. I need a comprehensive financial dossier on Arthur, Martha, and Tiffany Crestwood," I said, my voice cool. "I want everything: bank statements, credit card balances, loan amortization schedules, the terms of the mortgage on the new townhouse, and the foreclosure risk assessment on my parents' current rental. Bind it in a red leather folder, and put a Christmas bow on it." David blinked, accustomed to my strange requests but surprised by the personal nature of this one. "A Christmas bow, ma'am." "A big one," I confirmed. "I am going home for the holidays." David tapped on his screen, hesitating for a fraction of a second. He was the only person at Etheris who knew the truth about my background. He had seen the way I flinched when people raised their voices. He knew I had no family photos in my office. "With all due respect, Hannah," he said softly, dropping the formalities, "why you own half the county? You could buy the bank that holds their mortgage and evict them tomorrow. Why go back there and let them treat you like garbage? Why sit through the insults?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gray steel skyline of Boston. The snow was starting to fall, dusting the city in white. "Because eviction is a legal process, David," I said, turning back to him. "It is impersonal. It is just paperwork. What I need is not legal. It is visceral." I walked over to the desk and picked up a pen, twirling it between my fingers. "They have spent 29 years telling me I am nothing," I continued. "They have built their entire reality on the foundation that Tiffany is the sun and I am the dirt she walks on. If I just disappear, or if I just destroy them remotely, they will never understand. They will just think they are victims of bad luck. I need them to see me. I need to look them in the eye when the realization hits. I am not going back to argue with them. David. I am going back to close the coffin in my past. On Christmas Eve, the transformation began. I left the penthouse wearing a silk blouse and cashmere trousers. I drove my Porsche to a private storage unit on the outskirts of the city. Inside, my old Honda Civic was waiting, covered in a layer of dust that I had intentionally left undisturbed. I stripped off the expensive clothes and changed into the outfit of the defeated scuffed boots, ill-fitting trousers from a discount store, and a coat that had seen better decades. I removed my diamond stud earrings and replaced them with cheap plastic ones. I scrubbed the makeup off my face, leaving my skin pale and tired. As I sat in the driver's seat of the Honda, smelling the stale scent of old upholstery, I felt a strange thrill. It was the thrill of the undercover agent infiltrating enemy territory. I was a wolf zipping myself into a sheepskin. The drive to the suburbs was slow. The heater rattled, and the wipers smeared the snow rather than clearing it. Every mile closer to their house increased the pressure in my chest, but it was not anxiety, it was adrenaline. I pulled up to the curb, making sure to park crookedly, just as a careless, overwhelmed person would. I stared at the house. It was glowing with warmth, a beacon of festive cheer that hid the rot inside. I could see the silhouette of Tiffany in the window, likely posing for a selfie. I reached into the passenger seat and grabbed the red dossier. I shoved it deep into my oversized, battered tote bag. This was the bomb I would detonate at the dinner table, but not yet. First, I had to play the game. I stepped out of the car and walked up the driveway. The wind bit at my exposed face. I stopped at the front door, my hand hovering over the brass knocker. I could hear them inside my father's booming laugh, my mother's high-pitched chatter, the sounds of a family that had successfully excised me from their hearts. I closed my eyes and took a deep, centering breath. I mentally lowered my shoulders. I relaxed my facial muscles into an expression of perpetual apology. I extinguished the fire in my eyes and replaced it with dull resignation. I was no longer the chief strategy officer. I was no longer the millionaire owner of Ravenwood. I was Hannah's disappointment. Hannah the backup plan. Hannah the mark. I put on the mask for the very last time, and then I knocked. The silence that followed my mother's question was heavy, viscous, and suffocating. It hung over the table like a toxic cloud. Martha stared at me, her eyebrows raised in expectant triumph, waiting for me to crumble, to stutter an excuse, or to look down at my plate in shame. She wanted the satisfaction of my submission to sweeten her dessert, but I did not look down. I held her gaze, and the corner of my mouth remained fixed in that cold, deliberate smirk. Tiffany, sensing that the kill was not quite complete, decided to twist the knife. She twirled a lock of her hair around her finger, leaning back in her chair with a performative sigh. "Oh, Mom, do not be so hard on her," Tiffany said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "You know how it is. Hannah is probably just waiting for the right guy to come along. You know, someone with a pension and a spare bedroom who can whisk her away from that rental life. It is hard to be independent when you do not have assets." She giggled, a hollow sound that grated against my nerves. "I mean, I could never wait for a man to save me. That is why I bought my own place. But not everyone is built for the hustle." "Right, Hannah." I took a slow sip of water, watching her over the rim of the glass. The irony was so rich, it almost tasted metallic. The woman who had funded her entire life on our father's credit card was lecturing me on the hustle. Arthur cleared his throat, sensing an opening. He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table in a gesture that was meant to look fatherly, but looked more like a predator preparing to strike. "Actually, Hannah," Arthur said, his tone shifting from mockery to business, "since we are talking about the future, there's a small matter we wanted to discuss with you, a family matter." He poured more wine into Martha's glass, avoiding my eyes for a split second before locking onto them again. "Your sister has achieved something incredible with this house," he continued, But a house is just a shell without the proper atmosphere. Tiffany has found a supplier for authentic Italian furniture, hand-stitched leather, marble imported from Carrara. It is essential for her brand image. You understand the image, don't you? I understand the cost, I said quietly. Right. Well, Arthur rushed on, ignoring my tone. The banks are being incredibly difficult right now, tightening regulations, all that bureaucratic nonsense. They do not understand the potential of a digital entrepreneur like Tiffany. We need a co-signer for a small bridge loan to cover the interior design, just until Tiffany's new sponsorship deals kick in next quarter. He smiled, a tight, pained expression. We know you do not have any money. Hannah, we are not asking for cash, but you have always been safe. You have never taken risks. Your credit history is likely clean because you never use it. We just need your signature, your name. It would be a way for you to finally contribute to this family's success. There it was, the trap. They wanted to harvest my credit score like an organ donor. They wanted to shackle my clean financial identity to Tiffany's sinking ship. I slowly lowered my water glass to the table. I did not place it down gently. I let it drop the last half-inch. Clack! The sound was sharp, loud, and final. It cut through the ambient noise of the fireplace and the wind outside like a gunshot. I looked at Arthur, then at Martha, then at Tiffany. The warmth drained from my face, replaced by the icy, analytical mask of the Chief Strategy Officer of Etherius Dynamics. I sat up straighter, my shoulders squaring, my presence suddenly filling the room in a way it never had before. You want my signature, I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. It was not a question. It is just a formality, Martha said quickly, waving her hand. Do not make a big deal out of it. You want me to co-sign for the property at 45 Elm Street? I asked. The room went dead silent. Tiffany's fork paused halfway to her mouth. How? Tiffany started, her voice trembling slightly. How do you know the address? I have not posted it yet. I ignored her. I kept my eyes locked on my father. You want me to attach my name to a townhouse that was purchased for $850,000, I continued, reciting the numbers with surgical precision. A property that was appraised by the county last month at barely $600,000. That is a 40% markup. Dad, you let her buy a lemon. Arthur's face turned a shade of gray that matched the winter sky. Now, hold on. The market is fluctuating. The market is not fluctuating. It is correcting. I cut him off. My voice remained calm, terrifyingly steady. But that is not the worst part. The worst part is the loan structure. You signed her up for a variable rate mortgage starting at 4%, but you did not read page 32. Did you? The rate is not fixed for 5 years. It resets next month. Based on the current federal index, her interest rate is going to jump to 12% on the 15th of January. I leaned forward. Do you know what that does to the monthly payment? Tiffany, it triples it. You are not just underwater in this house. You are anchored to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Tiffany dropped her fork. It clattered onto the china. That is not true, she whispered, looking at Arthur. Daddy said the rate was locked. He said it was a good deal. Daddy lied, I said simply. Or, more likely, Daddy was too desperate to read the contract. Hannah, stop this, Martha shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. You are ruining Christmas. You are making things up because you are bitter. Am I? I turned my gaze to my mother. Shall we talk about your contribution then? Martha. She froze, her mouth open. You refinanced this house, I said, gesturing to the walls around us. The house you planned to retire in. You took out a home equity line of credit for $150,000. You cashed it out 3 weeks ago. You told the bank it was for home improvements. I paused, letting the weight of the number hang in the air. $150,000, I repeated. And where is it now? It is not in Tiffany's bank account. I checked. It went straight to the broker's commission and the closing costs for that overpriced townhouse. It is gone, Mom. Vaporized. You burned your retirement fund to buy a house that the bank is going to foreclose on in less than 6 months. Arthur stood up. his chair scraping violently against the floor. "That is enough. Who do you think you are? You are a receptionist. You file papers. How dare you come into my house and speak about my finances with such arrogance?" "Arrogance is buying a house you cannot afford," I countered, not moving a muscle. "Stupidity is leveraging your shelter to do it. Competence is knowing exactly when the bomb is going to go off." "You are jealous," Martha screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "You have always been jealous of her. You are making up these lies to hurt her because she is special, and you are nothing. You are a sad, lonely little girl with a cheap car and a cheap life." I looked at them, really looked at them. I saw the fear behind their anger. I saw the panic in Arthur's eyes as he realized I knew his darkest secret. I saw the fragility of Tiffany's ego shattering in real time. "Jealous?" I asked softly. I reached down into my battered tote bag. My fingers closed around the cool, smooth leather of the red dossier. I pulled it out. It was heavy, thick with the weight of their financial sins. I tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding across the tablecloth and knocking over a crystal salt shaker. The gold-embossed letters on the cover caught the light of the chandelier. "Confidential. Aetherist Dynamics, Intelligence Division." "I am not jealous, Mother," I said, standing up slowly, towering over them in my cheap clothes. "I am sorry." Arthur stared at the red leather folder lying amidst the gravy boats and silver platters. His hands, usually so quick to snatch a bill or a menu, hesitated. He looked at the gold embossing Aetherist Dynamics. He looked back at me, his eyes narrowing in confusion, unable to reconcile the image of his administrative assistant daughter with the high-level clearance level stamped on the cover. "What is this?" he asked, his voice losing its bluster. "Did you steal this? Are you trying to get arrested?" I laughed. It was a dark, rich sound that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. "Steal it, Arthur. I wrote it." I took a step closer to the table, my shadow falling over Tiffany. "You have spent the last 7 years asking me how my boss, Mr. Henderson, treats me. You have spent every holiday pitying me for my $10 an hour existence. But there is no Mr. Henderson. There never was." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost painful. "My name is Hannah Crestwood," I announced, my voice ringing with the authority of a judge passing a sentence. "And I am the Chief Strategy Officer of Aetherist Dynamics. I do not file papers. I decide the fate of companies. I advise governments on data sovereignty. And as for my income, let me put it in terms you can understand. The bonus check I deposited last Tuesday is larger than the total cumulative earnings of your entire 40-year career." "Dad." The reaction was visceral. Arthur's jaw literally dropped, his mouth hanging open like a fish gasping for air. Tiffany's hand spasmed, and her smartphone the tool of her trade. Her lifeline to her fake world slipped from her fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a sickening crack, shattering the screen. But she did not even look down. Her eyes were glued to me, wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Martha was the first to try to speak, her face draining of color until she looked like a wax statue.
"No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That is impossible. You drive a Honda. You wear old clothes. You are Hannah." "I am Hannah," I agreed. "But I am not the Hannah you created. I am the Hannah I built despite you." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. With a few taps, I overrode the casting protocol of their smart TV mounted above the fireplace. The screen flickered, replacing the loop of a digital Yule log with a live, high-definition feed. The room gasped. On the screen was a sweeping cinematic view of a snow-covered estate. The camera panned over a massive, slate-roofed mansion illuminated by tasteful golden floodlights. It moved over the frozen private lake, the manicured gardens, and the private helipad where landing lights pulsed softly in the dark. It was a scene of unadulterated wealth and power. "This is not a screensaver," I said, pointing to the television. "This is a live feed from my security system. Welcome to the Ravenwood Estate,
My home. Yours, Tiffany squeaked, her voice an octave higher than usual. Mine, I confirmed. Paid for in cash. $12,500,000. No mortgage, no cosigners, no bank loans. And unlike your townhouse, Tiffany, the foundation is solid granite, not debt and delusion. I swiped the screen on my phone, switching the camera view to the interior. The feed showed the library, the two-story cathedral of books, the roaring fire, the leather chairs that smelled of history and money. And here is the most important feature, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. It has 10 bedrooms, 12 bathrooms, a guest wing that rivals a 5-star hotel. But there is no room for guests. Specifically, there is no room for you. I walked around the table until I was standing directly behind Tiffany. She shrank away from me, terrified. Do you remember 3 months ago? I asked her. I came over for Sunday brunch. I was wearing that beige trench coat. The one you said looked like it belonged to a homeless person. You laughed at me. You told me I should burn it. Tiffany nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. That day, I said, leaning down so my lips were inches from her ear. I had just closed a deal that netted me a commission of $200,000. I was feeling generous. I had actually planned to use that money to pay off your credit card debt anonymously. I was going to give you a clean slate. Tiffany let out a sob. Hannah, please. But then you made that joke, I continued, straightening up. You mocked the coat, and I realized something. You do not deserve a clean slate. You deserve the mess you made. So, instead of paying your debt, I used that $200,000 to buy an original oil painting from the 17th century. It is currently hanging in the powder room off the main hall at Ravenwood. Every time I wash my hands, I look at it and think of you. The brutality of the statement hung in the air. I had valued a bathroom decoration over her financial survival. Martha suddenly lunged out of her chair. The shock had worn off, replaced by a desperate, scrambling survival instinct. She rushed around the table and grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, her nails digging into my cashmere sleeve. Oh, Hannah, my baby, Martha cried, her voice trembling with a grotesque parody of affection. I knew it. I always knew you were a genius. We were so hard on you because we saw your potential. We just wanted to push you. We played the bad guys so you would fight harder. It was all for you. Honey, we were using reverse psychology. She tried to hug me, her perfume cloying and suffocating. You have to understand. A mother knows what her child needs. I made you this strong. I made you this successful. I looked down at her hands on my arm. I did not shove her away. I simply stepped back, a movement so cold and fluid that her hands fell from me as if I were made of ice. Stop it, I said. My voice was not loud, but it stopped her dead in her tracks. Do not rewrite history. Martha, you did not push me. You discarded me. You did not use reverse psychology. You used neglect. I looked from Martha to Arthur, then to Tiffany. You bet everything on her, I said, pointing a manicured finger at my sobbing sister. You treated her like gold, and me like gravel, but you made a mistake. You do not know the difference between value and price. Tiffany is fool's gold. She shines, she glitters, but she is soft, she is malleable, and ultimately, she is worthless. I tapped my own chest. I am the diamond. I was created under the crushing pressure of your indifference. I am hard. I am unbreakable, and I am worth more than you can ever comprehend. Arthur slumped back in his chair, looking like a man who had just watched his house burn down. Hannah, he croaked, we are family. You have so much. You can help us. We can fix this. We just need a little time. Time is money. Arthur, I said, and you are out of both. I walked back to the head of the table, standing where my father usually sat. I placed my hands on the wood, leaning forward. You mentioned earlier that the banks are tightening regulations, I said, a cruel smile playing on my lips. That is true. In fact, The regional bank that holds the mortgage on this house and the toxic loan on Tiffany's townhouse was looking to offload some of its high-risk assets before the end of the fiscal year. They were selling a bundle of bad debts to private equity firms this morning. Arthur's eyes widened. What are you saying? I am saying that Aetherus Dynamics has a very aggressive investment arm. I lied smoothly. I did not need the company. I had used my own private holding firm, but the name scared them more. I directed my personal broker to purchase a specific tranche of distressed debt at 9 o'clock this morning. I picked up the red dossier and flipped it open to the last page. It was a transfer of deed and a notice of assignment of debt. I own your mortgage, Arthur, I said, and I own yours. Tiffany, I am not your daughter tonight. I am not your sister. I am your creditor. The color drained from Arthur's face so completely he looked like a corpse. Martha let out a strangled wail and collapsed into her chair. Tiffany just sat there, staring at the shattered remains of her phone, realizing that the sister she had mocked for 10 years now held the leash to her entire existence. And as your creditor, I said, checking my watch, I am very concerned about your ability to pay. The transformation in the room was instantaneous and pathetic. The moment the word creditor left my lips, the dynamic shifted so violently it was almost dizzying. My father, who minutes ago had been slamming his hand on the table and demanding respect, seemed to shrink inside his expensive suit. His posture collapsed. The arrogance that had defined him for my entire life evaporated, leaving behind a terrified old man realizing he was standing on a trapdoor. Martha was the first to break the silence. She did not scream this time. She whimpered. She reached out across the table, her hands shaking, knocking over a wine glass. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth like a bloodstain, but no one moved to clean it up. Hannah, she pleaded, her voice cracking, you cannot be serious. You are our daughter. You would not put your own parents on the street. We raised you. We fed you. You did the legal minimum required by the state, I corrected her, my voice devoid of warmth. And now, I am doing the legal minimum required by a lender. I am not going to evict you tonight. Martha, it is Christmas Eve, after all, and even banks observe federal holidays. Arthur looked up, a flicker of hope in his watery eyes. So, will you help us? You will write it off, Hannah. Thank God. I knew you were a good girl. I knew you would not let us drown. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. You misunderstand. Arthur, I am not writing anything off. I bought your debt. I did not erase it. I am not a charity. I am a business, and you are now my clients. I walked around the table, the heels of my cheap boots clicking on the floor with a rhythm that sounded like a ticking clock. Here is the deal, I said, addressing the room. I will not foreclose on this house or the townhouse immediately. I will freeze the interest rate at the current market standard, which is significantly lower than the predatory rate you signed up for. That is my gift to you. That is the only mercy you will receive. I stopped in front of Tiffany. She was still staring at me, her face a mask of shock and resentment. However, I continued, there will be no more handouts. There will be no more loans for furniture or vacations. You will pay me back every single cent of the principal. Arthur, you will not be retiring next year. You will work until this debt is cleared. And Tiffany, I suggest you get a job, a real one. Starbucks is hiring. I hear they offer good benefits for entry-level baristas. Tiffany's face twisted in rage. She stood up, knocking her chair back. The entitlement that had been fed to her for 26 years exploded. You are a monster, she screamed, her face turning an ugly shade of red. You are cold-blooded, you have millions of dollars, you live in a castle, and you are going to make Dad work. You are going to make me serve coffee. You are stingy. Why do you care about a few $1,000s when you are that rich? You are just doing this to be mean. I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had never worked a day in her life, who had mocked my clothes, my car, and my existence while spending my inheritance. You are right, Tiffany, I said, my voice calm and deadly quiet. I am rich. I could write a check to clear this entire mess and not even notice the difference in my bank account, but I won't. I picked up my battered tote bag and slung it over my shoulder. I looked at my parents, who were watching me with a mixture of fear and hatred. I do not regret the money, I said, delivering the words with the precision of a surgeon severing a limb. I regret the love I wasted on the wrong people. You asked me earlier when I would finally settle down. Well, here is your answer. To me. Settling down means removing the parasites from my life so I can finally breathe. I paused, letting the word parasites hang in the air. Merry Christmas, I said. I turned my back on them and walked toward the door. Behind me, the dam broke. I heard Martha sobbing, screaming at Arthur for ruining them. I heard Arthur shouting at Tiffany, blaming her vanity for their bankruptcy. I heard Tiffany shrieking that it was not her fault, that they had promised her the house. It was a symphony of chaos, a cacophony of blame. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to fix it. I did not feel the need to be the peacemaker. I opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the night. The cold air hit me like a blessing. It was crisp, clean, and honest. I walked down the driveway to my rusted Honda Civic. I looked back at the house one last time. Through the window, I could see them gesturing wildly, tearing each other apart. The perfect family portrait had been slashed, and they were finally showing their true colors. I got into the car and started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, leaving the festive lights of their rented delusion behind, I reached for my phone. I opened my contacts list. Arthur Crestwood. Block contact. Martha Crestwood. Block contact. Tiffany Crestwood. Block contact. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The silence in the car was absolute, and it was beautiful. The drive to the Berkshires took 2 hours. As I left the city limits and entered the dark, winding roads of the country, I felt lighter with every mile. The persona of the struggling administrative assistant sheet away like a dead skin. I was no longer the daughter who wasn't enough. I was the woman who had too much for them to handle. When the iron gates of Ravenwood Estate swung open to welcome me, I felt a physical release of tension in my shoulders. I drove up the long, white gravel driveway, the headlights catching the snowflakes that danced in the air. I parked the Honda in the massive 6-car garage, right next to my Porsche and my vintage Jaguar. I walked into the house, the biometric scanner reading my retina and unlocking the door with a soft, expensive click. "Welcome home, Ms. Crestwood," the automated system greeted me, the voice smooth and deferential. "The temperature is set to 72 degrees. Would you like the fireplace lit?" "Yes," I said aloud. "And play the cello suites by Bach." I walked into the great room. The fire roared to life in the stone hearth. I went to the wet bar and poured myself a glass of a 1996 Cabernet Sauvignon. The liquid was dark and rich, swirling in the crystal glass. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out. The lake was a sheet of white ice, glowing softly under the moonlight. The forest stood guard around me, a wall of silence keeping the world at bay. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a notification from the private banking app I use to manage my high-risk assets. Notification: loan restructuring for account ending in 459 approved. Borrower: Arthur and Martha Crestwood. Term extension: 1 month granted. Note: non-contact clause activated. Any attempt by the borrower to contact the creditor or the creditor's agents will result in immediate acceleration of the debt and foreclosure proceedings. I read the message twice. I had given them a month to figure out how to survive. I had given them a lifeline, but I had wrapped it in barbed wire. They could keep their house for now, but the price was their silence. They could no longer reach me. They could no longer hurt me. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted of blackberries and oak. It tasted like victory. A smile spread across my face. It was not the smirk of the predator I had worn at dinner. It was a genuine smile. It was soft, relaxed, and real. I was alone in a mansion that could house 50 people. The wind was howling outside, battering the stone walls. But inside, I was warm, I was safe, and for the first time in 29 years, I was completely, utterly free. My family was back in Boston, beginning the coldest, hardest winter of their lives. But here, at Ravenwood, the fire was warm, and the future was entirely mine. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please drop a comment below and let me know your country or city. And tell me what you would have done if you were in Hannah's shoes. Would you have forgiven them, or did she make the right call? If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Veronica Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who love a good tale of justice served. Your support means the world to me and helps me keep bringing you these stories. Merry Christmas, and stay strong.